Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into something quite contradictory about America, a real puzzle.
We are. It's about World War I and how the U.S. jumped onto the world stage in this huge way.
Only to immediately step back. It's this core paradox that honestly shaped so much of the 20th century for the U.S.
Exactly. In 1914, when the war broke out, the U.S. was firmly neutral. That was the tradition, right? Stay out of Europe's messes.
Strict neutrality, like official policy.
Yeah, but it didn't last. So the big question for us today, the thing we want to unpack for you, is how? How does a nation go from 3 years of determined neutrality
To sending millions of soldiers overseas, becoming arguably the deciding factor in the war.
and then, right at the peak of its influence, turns around and rejects the very peace framework, the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations that its own president championed?
It's like a national identity crisis played out on the world stage, a major break from isolationism, then snapping right back.
Okay, let's dive in. What started chipping away at that neutrality? Why did it become, well, impossible to maintain? Well, it wasn't just one thing. You have to see it as mounting pressure. External forces, economic realities. They just kept grinding against that neutral stance until it broke.
Right. So let's talk triggers, the stuff people really felt at the time. Unrestricted submarine warfare has to be top of the list.
Sure.
Germany's policy.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just military ships they were targeting. Germany declared the waters around Britain a war zone. All ships were targets. Civilian, neutral, everything.
And the big one, the one everyone remembers, is the Lusitania,
Yeah.
1915.
Yes. A British passenger liner sunk without warning. Over 1,000 people died, including 128 Americans. That was a profound shock. Public opinion in the U.S., it hardened overnight.
Did Germany back off that?
Temporarily, yes. They moderated their submarine tactics because they realized, pushing the U.S. too far wasn't smart. But that only lasted so long.
Until 1917.
Exactly. By early 1917, Germany felt they had to gamble. They resumed full, unrestricted submarine warfare, believing they could strangle Britain before the U.S. could effectively mobilize and intervene. They started sinking American merchant ships again.
And that forces Wilson's hand on the diplomatic front.
It severs diplomatic ties completely. The war was now actively, physically impacting American lives and property on the high seas.
Okay, so that's the immediate visceral trigger. But you mentioned economics. There's always a money trail, isn't there?
There usually is, and here it's crucial. Even while officially neutral, the American economy had become deeply, deeply intertwined with the Allied powers, Britain and France.
How so? Loans, supplies.
Both, massively. American banks were lending enormous sums to the Allies. American industries were churning out weapons, food supplies, basically becoming the arsenal and pantry for Britain and France.
So we weren't really neutral economically, even if we were politically.
Not in practice, no. There was a huge financial stake in an Allied victory. If Britain and France lost, think about it, those billions in loans and credits, they could just vanish, defaulted.
So an Allied defeat would have been an economic catastrophe for certain American interests?
A major blow, certainly. So this economic reality is simmering beneath the surface of the moral outrage about the U-boats.
Which makes the timing of the Zimmerman telegram even more explosive. Early 1917, right when submarine warfare restarts.
Yes, and this is where it gets, well, almost cinematic. British intelligence intercepts and decodes the secret message from the German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann.
To Mexico.
To Mexico, exactly. Get this. Germany proposes a military alliance with Mexico if the U.S. enters the war against Germany.
Down the offer.
Germany promises support financial and military from Mexico to reconquer lost territory. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona.
Wow, that's bold
Yeah.
and incredibly inflammatory if it gets out.
And the British made sure it got out. They passed it to the U.S. It was published. The American public was enraged. It transformed the threat from something happening across the ocean.
To a potential invasion across the southern border.
Yeah.
It confirmed German hostility in the most direct way possible.
Yeah.
Made the isolationist argument much harder to sustain.
Precisely. So now you have this perfect storm. German U-boats sinking American ships. Huge economic interests tied to an Allied win, and now a direct documented German plot against U.S. territory.
What does Wilson do? He needs more than just banking interests or even the telegram to justify war, right? He needs a bigger idea.
He does. And this is where Wilson, the idealist, comes in. He frames the decision not simply as self-defense or protecting commerce, but as a moral imperative. a crusade.
Make the world safe for democracy.
That's the phrase. He casts American involvement as a duty to uphold democracy, human rights, international law against German aggression. It elevates the conflict.
So, when he goes to Congress, April 2nd, 1917, it's with this high-minded justification, not just about shifts of territory, but ideals.
Yes. He asks Congress to recognize that Germany's actions already constitute war against the United States. It's a decisive, total break from that long tradition of isolation.
The break is complete. Okay, so the U.S. is in. Let's jump forward. The American military contribution. It's often described as decisive, but they were only really in heavy combat for about the last year and a half, maybe 20 months total. How does that work?
It's about timing, scale, and morale, really. By 1918, the European powers were utterly exhausted. Years of brutal trench warfare, horrific casualties, collapsing morale on both sides.
Armies were bled white.
Literally.
Yeah.
Then, the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF, under General Pershing, start arriving in large numbers. We're talking about eventually 2 million fresh, motivated soldiers hitting the Western Front.
That must have been a huge psychological blow to the Germans.
And an equally huge boost to the Allies. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the potential numbers still to come. It signaled that the resource balance had tipped decisively against Germany.
And these troops eventually saw major action, right? Like the Meuse-Argonne offensive.
Oh, absolutely. The Meuse-Argonne in the fall of 1918 was the largest American battle of the war, over 1.2 million U.S. troops involved. It was where the AEF really proved it could operate on a massive scale, taking its own sector of the front.
And it was successful.
It was incredibly bloody, one of the costliest campaigns in American history. They took heavy casualties, learned hard lessons about modern warfare very quickly. But yes, ultimately, their relentless push broke through the final German defensive lines. It was a key factor in forcing Germany to seek an armistice.
So brutal, costly, but undeniably significant in ending the war.
No question.
Now, within this massive military effort, there were these incredible stories, like the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment.
An amazing story, and one that highlights the deep contradictions of the time. This was an all-black regiment, and because of segregation in the U.S. Army...
They weren't allowed to fight under American command.
Correct. It's quite shocking, really. They were essentially assigned to the French Army, put under French command.
But they distinguished themselves, didn't they?
Immensely. They spent more time in continuous combat, 191 days in the frontline trenches, than any other American unit. Fought with incredible bravery, earned the French Croix de Guerre, their highest military honor, for their collective heroism.
So their service directly challenged the racism they faced back home.
Absolutely. Their record was undeniable proof of their courage and capability, powerfully refuting the racist stereotypes used to justify segregation. It became a source of immense pride and a catalyst for future civil rights efforts.
Then you have individual stories, too, like Sergeant Alvin York.
Right, the quintessential American hero figure from the war. A sharpshooter from Tennessee, initially a conscientious objector based on his religion.
Who ends up capturing 132 German soldiers almost single-handedly during the Meuse-Argonne.
Incredible story. He became a national icon, a symbol of American courage, resilience, sort of the citizen soldier ideal that the Wilson administration promoted to rally support for the war.
So putting it all together, the AEF's involvement, these battles, these soldiers, it fundamentally changes America's position in the world.
It does. Militarily, the U.S. goes from being a potential power to a proven major global military force, capable of projecting power across the Atlantic. That reality is forged in 1918.
Okay, so the war ends. Armistice, November 11th, 1918. The fighting stops. But the political battle. That's just beginning back home, isn't it?
That's where the paradox really comes into sharp focus. The war is won, American influence is at an all-time high, and then the retreat.
Wilson goes to Paris for the peace conference. He's got his big vision, the 14 points.
Yes, a very idealistic framework for a new world order. Freedom of the seas, reducing arms, self-determination for different nationalities, and the cornerstone, a League of Nations, collective security to prevent future wars.
But he runs into trouble in Paris, right? Not just with the Germans, but with the Allies.
Definitely. Britain and France, especially France, had suffered terribly. They weren't primarily focused on Wilson's lofty ideals. They wanted security, revenge, and reparations from Germany. Punitive measures.
So Wilson has to compromise.
Heavily. The negotiations were brutal. And Wilson himself wasn't in great shape. He actually contracted the severe Spanish flu while in Paris, which weakened him physically and perhaps politically. He had to trade away many of his specific points to save the one thing he saw as essential:
The League of Nations.
Exactly. He believed the League, once established, could fix the treaty's flaws over time. It was the key to lasting peace, in his view.
But he paid a price back home for focusing so much on the League.
A huge price. And this raises a critical point. Wilson made, arguably, a major political misstep. He largely excluded prominent Republicans from his peace delegation.
Making the treaty, and especially the League, look like a partisan Democratic project.
Precisely, which gave his opponents in the Senate an opening.
And the Senate. They ultimately reject the Treaty of Versailles, flat out refuse to ratify it.
They do, after a long and bitter fight. It wasn't just a simple no, it was a calculated political campaign led by Republicans, particularly Senator Henry Cabot Lodge.
So why? What were the main reasons for opposition? Was it purely isolationism?
Isolationist sentiment was definitely a big part of it. Many Americans, probably a majority, looked at the horrors of the war and just wanted out. No more European entanglements. Let's go back to focusing on ourselves.
But it wasn't just that.
No. Second, there was intense partisan rivalry. Lodge personally disliked Wilson and saw a chance to cripple his presidency and the Democratic Party. He skillfully used the treaty debate to rally Republican opposition.
And the third reason. You hear about constitutional concerns.
That was probably the most potent formal argument, especially around Article X of the League Covenant. This article basically committed member nations to preserve the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all other members.
Meaning the U.S. could be obligated to join a foreign conflict.
That was the fear. Critics argued Article X could potentially drag the United States into future wars automatically without a specific vote by Congress to declare war, effectively overriding Congress's constitutional power.
A surrender of sovereignty, they called it.
Exactly. Lodge and others framed it as giving up American independence to an international body. Whether that was the real primary motive or a convenient constitutional argument is debated, but it was highly effective politically.
So the Senate rejects the treaty. The U.S. never joins the League of Nations.
Correct. The U.S. signed separate peace treaties with Germany and the other Central Powers later on. Politically, it signals a deliberate, conscious return to isolationism. America steps back from the world stage it had just dominated.
Just amazing. We achieved this unprecedented power, shaped the peace, and then refused to participate in upholding it.
That's the paradox in a nutshell.
So let's wrap this up for you, our listener. What does it all mean? The U.S. dives into World War I, ostensibly to make the world safe for democracy. It becomes this decisive military and economic force.
But then pulls back, rejecting the very international system, the League it helped create, choosing isolationism instead.
You've followed the path, from the shock of the Lusitania and the threat of the Zimmermann telegram, through the brutal fighting of the Meuse-Argonne and the heroism of soldiers like the Harlem Hellfighters.
Right into the heart of American politics, that fierce battle between Wilson's international vision and Lodge's defense of national sovereignty, or perhaps partisan advantage.
We proved our strength, then decided not to fully wield it, at least not through collective security.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. The sources make it clear that even though the U.S. rejected the League, aiming for isolation, WWI itself had already fundamentally changed America's global position. Its economic and military power was undeniable.
So here's the question. Did the Senate's rejection of the treaty truly shield the U.S. from global entanglement in the long run? Or did it merely postpone the inevitable, delaying America's assumption of a global leadership role that its sheer size and power perhaps made unavoidable anyway?
Was isolationism after 1919 a real possibility, or just a temporary political choice against the tide of history? Something to think about.
We'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.